Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here. We have a special guest, our good friend of many years, Ralph Malillo. This is a bonus episode for our patrons. It might be released maybe further down the line to the general public, but this is going to be our third bonus episode. And the topic of this episode is going to be we talk a lot about the mixtape that kind of started our fandom of metal, and that mixtape was made by Ralph back in 1997. I had asked him as a birthday gift. We went to high school together, and we would sit together in the cafeteria for lunch every day. And I said, for my birthday, I want you to make me a mixtape of this metal stuff that you listen to, because I had remembered coming to your house and you playing, I want to say like Chance by Sabotage, and like I would hear songs and just be like, wow, like this is really cool. And it was a time in my life where I wasn't really into any sort of like radio or popular music, and I was looking for something to fill that void. So that was kind of how it all began. So that was the idea behind this. So before we get started, Justin, how are you?
I'm good, man. That's a hell of an introduction, but everyone knows my voice, so I'm going to turn it over to Ralph. Why don't you introduce yourself? And I can't wait to take this walk down memory lane, because I'll be honest with you, I'm looking at this track listing, and I am just like floored by some of this stuff.
Yeah, so as the guys mentioned, I'm Ralph Malillo. I grew up in New Hyde Park, and that's how I met these other two schmoes. Essentially, I mean, Chris, your memory is better than mine. Perhaps you even know the year that we first met. I'll leave it to you if you do. I don't know. I mean, I can't recall, but it's probably like early 90s.
Yeah, what year was it that you moved to Long Island from Queens?
Well, now that I have a kid, I can kind of guesstimate, because I was in New Hyde Park in third grade, so that would put me at like 5, 6, 7 or 8 years old, and I was born in 81, so I was probably out here at the like 89, 90.
Yeah, my memory was that you went to the public school very briefly after you moved, and you met Crea, and so through I knew you originally from Crea, and then I met you and your brother through Greg after you guys started going to Catholic school. So I would say I definitely remember like going to your house for like wrestling events and stuff in like 1993. So it probably would have been even before that. So yeah, probably 91, 92, I would say.
Yeah, and as far as I know, I mean, we basically were street rats. Like we lived outside, and that's how we don't see this nowadays, but this was our childhood. So we were essentially outside riding bikes and doing things that kids don't do anymore. And essentially that's how that's how it all kind of fell into place, because I would see people around the neighborhood. Perhaps you had a different group of friends, and then we all became one group of friends. And obviously, I'm sure you probably mentioned at some point in your broadcasting that we're all hockey people, and essentially that really made the knot tighter, was just playing hockey every single day of our lives. And I think there's some of this music that we're talking about gets tied into that, because we would listen to, you had that silly boombox that you carried around, and we would play music, and that's how, we were all listening to that kind of stuff. And so that's why perhaps, we were thinking about mixtapes in the first place, to have something to listen to, not just in our house when we were sitting there by ourselves playing a video game or something like Genesis, but perhaps because we wanted to hear it outside when we were playing hockey or whatever street sport, kickball. Remember kickball?
Sure. I remember distinctly playing hockey outside your house, and you playing Twisted Sister, playing "We're Not Gonna Take It" on a loop, just the song over and over again. And as the story goes, as I recall, you told me that your cousin, who I don't believe I had met at that point, gave you a bunch of old CDs or just like a pile of old CDs, and that was one of them. And I remember you were just like loving that song, and we put it on the loop on the CD player outside your house and just played hockey while "We're Not Gonna Take It" played over and over and over again.
You're right about that story, except you got the person wrong. Actually, my uncle Hans he was like he was a tradesman, right? So he just did lots of different jobs. But one thing I remember, I stayed at his place in Ronkonkoma, and he had done shingling, roofing for somebody's house, and it happens to be like the Columbia Records guy. And as a tip for the work well done or whatever, he gave the workers like a bunch of boxes of CDs. So that was the box I rummaged through. He was like, just take whatever you want. I probably have half of it. So like, yeah, I got discs like, all the classic, White Snake and the one you just mentioned as well. There was a bunch. That's where I got a bunch. I remember Slaughter.
Nice.
I distinctly remember the cover of that album because I was a young boy, and the album cover was like a girl up against like a dartboard, and the guy was throwing knives at her, like one of those kind of circus acts. So,
when you're 9 years old, I think that's it's a pivotal moment in everyone's lives where they see that album cover for the first time.
For the most part, I mean, like, yeah, it's another thing that's gone. Album covers, right, from like the popular culture, So, anyways,
where do you remember like where or when or what it was that kind of flipped the switch for you as far as listening to metal is concerned? I mean, I have to assume that your cousin Pat was the big influence there, but do you remember like if there was like one particular song or a band or like do you remember kind of the story of how it started to hit you?
Yeah, so I actually kind of distinctly remember that, and very well I don't really remember much. We used to hang out a lot at my grandmother's house, and you bring up my cousin Pat. So, my cousin and Pat had a sort of tumultuous relationship growing up because he was 6 years older than me. And, when you're a teenager, I guess you just pick on the little guys. And he was very much into wrestling, so everything was centered around beating the crap out of each other. So somehow or another, he'd figure out a way to make me wrestle my brother, and then he would, just be a person that egged it on all the time. That's what he does. So my grandfather used, as I understand it, because I was too young to really understand money much back then, but I think he used to throw my cousin some money either for me or for us or for something, because my cousin would go to these record stores and buy albums. Like he was already into the music in the mid '90s, and I remember distinctly that I was very much a Pearl Jam person, kind of into Green Day a little bit. You more so than I. I remember our Green Day ages, and Nirvana. These were like the bands that we were listening to, and so my cousin would say, "Hey, I'm going to that special record store. Is there anything I should get you?" And I said to him, "Well, I like Pearl Jam." And I remember him going there, and at the time, the big thing was bootlegs. So he would go to these stores and get bootlegs, and he would find himself several bootlegged, Dream Theater albums or whatever. And for me, he would get me like Green Day Live, and what was the other one? I just said Pearl Jam. So then one day he just looked at me and goes, "I'm not going to waste my money on this bullshit music." He's like, "You got to start listening to like some good stuff. Otherwise, that's it. I'm not buying you any more of these CDs you keep asking me to buy." I can't remember exactly what day that was, but I do recall like right around that time, he was going to like one of these local clubs to see Dream Theater perform. And he was always like, "Yeah, you should come. It's a lot of fun. There's like 20 people there, only one of which is actually listening to the music. The other people are eating dinner." He's like, "It's like $5 to get in or whatever the cover charges." I mean, this is Dream Theater we're talking about back then. And I'm like, "Well, I don't really know Dream Theater." So he's like, "Well, then you should listen to it." So he put on some like, what was the song? Wait for Sleep. So he puts Wait for Sleep on, and that was like an earworm for me. So it got in my head, and I really wanted that song. So I went to at the time there was a bunch of CD stores. And I couldn't get it out of my head. Like I was like into this other stuff still, but I just wanted that song. So I went to the store, and of course, the only store that was around was the Wall that I knew about. So I went to the Wall. It was in Lake Success Shopping Center, and I remember they used to have these touchscreen computer TV things. I type it in, and if they didn't have the album you wanted, you would hit a button, and it would print out like a little receipt, and you bring it up to the front. And they would like order it like a library. And when it came in, they would call you. Even though libraries are different nowadays for some of your younger viewers. But anyways, the point is that they didn't have that album. So I was just rummaging through, and I remember he liked Halloween with the pumpkins. I just remember pumpkins. And that was the only thing I could find was Halloween. So I grabbed The Best, the Rest, and the Rare. So that was my first album I bought. Not that I wanted to, but it was the only thing available, and that I was even aware of. Like, I probably wasn't thinking about Angra or any of that stuff. They may have had that. I don't know. But I just grabbed that Halloween album. And that was the first album I brought home and listened to on repeat until I got the phone call that my Dream Theater album was ready for being picked up. And I got the guarantee, so I had the little blue sticker on it.
Now they're closed, and the CD is probably
worthless. It's completely worthless. So.
Yeah.
So that was the story about how I got into it. So he pressured me using my grandfather's money, and that's how it began. And then from there on in, I was like, what other things should I get? Or perhaps now that he knew I was starting to like it, he was buying me some albums. I can't exactly remember. I didn't have money, so anything I had to get was coming from my parents. So that was a little hit or miss. But so I definitely got some Angra albums, some Stradivarius stuff. Slowly over the time, like he'd be like, "Oh, you need this album," and he would buy that stuff and give me the basics. So that's how I got into it.
And we would eventually become friends with Pat to where he would be emailing us. We would be like, what's new and good? Like, it's not like there wasn't as much of a way to like find out what was going on in the metal world, because it's 1997, 98, we have dial-up AOL. Like, it's a lot of these bands are not releasing their albums in the States, so like we're kind of using word of mouth, and Pat was kind of like a conduit to like let us know what was hip and what was cool, and so I remember two specific instances leading up to this time period. One was coming to your house in Manhasset Hills after you had moved, and you playing Chance by Sabotage for us in your bedroom. And I want to say Pat was there. I don't remember who else was there, but I just remember thinking to myself, I've never heard anything quite like this. And another time I remember you came to my house and we were sitting outside on the front porch, and I had you were like, I got this new CD, bring out your CD player, you need to hear this. And it was Angra's Holy Land, and you put on Carolina the Fourth, and you're like, you have to hear this song. And I was just thinking to myself, like, again, like, this is unlike anything I've ever heard before. And that kind of led me to wanting to hear more. And that's why I had asked you to make this mixtape. And this tape has been brought up so many times on this podcast because of, like, we've done so many albums that appeared on this tape. And it just was like, it just opened this whole world for me. And then I would go on to, like, sharing it with Justin and Mike and Nick and all of our friends at the time. And it just became kind of like this community, this community love and interest and, borderline obsession, I would say. And just like comparing, somebody getting a new CD and being like, holy shit, how is that? Or like, Pat being like, you have to get this band Superior or this band Labyrinth, or like, I'd be like, sure, whatever you say. I gotta, Virgin Steel, you gotta check out Invictus. Like, I just remember just him sending me an email with just a list of things, and then I would pass that list on to my family members around Christmas time or my birthday or whatever, and be like, here, find these. But
you needed those recommendations, because at the time the discs were like $18 a piece. So what is that today? Like $40 or something like that? I mean, like, if you took a shot in the dark and you missed, you were out a lot of money. I mean, back then when you had no money. So, it was all either gifts from parents or something like that, or word of mouth. And fortunately, it's hard to screw up like Divine Wings of Tragedy or Superior's Behind. It would have been a lot worse if they were like, oh, go get the Angra live album with Edu that sucked, like from 2002 or whatever it was. So it's nice that you actually had recommendations to work off of.
Ralph, did you ever get something that you were just like, oh man, this was a real miss for me around that time?
So I mean, if I go back a little further, keep it in the same time frame when I was getting these newer albums with Pat. These were tried and tested albums. I mean, we're talking about the original bands that sort of set me up for probably set up the rest of progressive metal as we know it. So you're talking about like Stratovarius, Dream Theater, Halloween, and to that end, Angry, you mentioned. I remember distinctly having conversations with my cousin saying things like, it stinks that we'll never get to see these bands live. It'll just never happen. Like, these guys live and play over in other countries, and like there's not really a fan base in America. So, the closest we'll get is just these CDs. And towards the end of the 90s, I took a trip with my first girlfriend's family, it was a long time ago, to Italy. And I recall perhaps maybe the first time one of us ever sort of like did what you were just describing, sort of like tried to find a new band. So I remember distinctly walking into like a CD store, which was in one of their like train stations. And I remember distinctly, like at that time I knew who Labyrinth was. In fact, on the back of like Labyrinth's album, it had like some sort of address, and I stopped by their house. And I remember thinking, like, should I press the button?
You're Rob Tyrant's first stalker.
It was really weird. And I was like, I made this family like go by this house because we were in that right town, and they were willing, and we just kind of walked over there. I was like, I can't do it. I never pressed the button or anything like that, but the doorbell, whatever you call it. But in this store, I was talking with the salesman or whatever they call them, and I said to him, the CD artist, what do you basically have that's similar to Dream Theater or whatever? And that's where Mob Rules came from, with a bunch of other albums. Cathedral was another band, I think. Gosh. So I remember just taking all the money I had, all the lira, and just like putting it on the table. So what can I get for this kind of thing? And I just remember having this stack of CDs, and I grabbed some for Pat because he's like, if you see anything good, just get it for me. Like, just get it. And I remember bringing home this pile of CDs, and that's where like we found out about a couple of different bands. And I'm sure in that group, and I will never remember who the misses were because that's exactly why you don't remember misses.
Fair enough.
But I do distinctly remember like the Mob Rules, the Cathedral, those kind of bands were just like in that pile, and that's how
you gave me a CD from that pile. Do you remember what it was?
Absolutely not.
It was a Dream Theater tribute album by like a whole bunch of European bands. I think they were mostly Italian bands, like Empty Tremor was on there.
Oh, yeah. I do remember that now you say it. Gosh, why not?
I think I told that story. I don't know that there's really too many stories that you're going to hear today that have not been told on this podcast after 150. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Better question is, when was the last time you listened to it?
The CD's in the basement collecting dust with the rest of the CDs, but it's in my iTunes, safe and sound. So if I ever want to listen to CKNY do a cover of Surrounded, I know where to go.
By the way, one of the best covers of Surrounded probably ever.
I know that. I remember
maybe one of the only covers of Surrounded.
I remember you like pointing that out in particular. You were like, I never would have imagined a Dream Theater song sung by a female vocalist. It's so cool. And I remember that. I still go back. It's on one of my, I would go on to make a slew of mixtapes after this one. And that was leading to mixed CDs, to just playlists to this day. I have 20 plus years of just like set of playlists. And it all goes back to this one tape that I listened to repeatedly. I bought a couple of CDs after listening to this tape, but like I would just go back and play this tape over and over and over again, and then eventually it was almost like, remember when you buy baseball cards and you get the checklist and it would have, you'd check off all the cards that, like, this was like, for me it was like, okay, all right, I'm going to need to get this album because it's on the tape. All right, now I got to get this album because it's on the tape. And then there's one album that to this day I never bought, and we'll get to that. But Ralph, if you had to guess, because we haven't told you what was on this tape, so for all you know, it's been 20 plus years since you've even thought about this. What do you think would be on this tape based on the time period involved? So, like, you gave this tape to me in June of 1997. So, I mean, I'm not going to say yes or no. We're going to surprise you track by track, but I'm just curious if you had to guess what was on here, what do you think you would have put on here at that time?
Well, my memory sucks, so that's number one.
That's what makes it all the more fun, because
I know. And then you're asking me to put things into time and space, and I can't do that. But I will hazard a guess that there's a couple, at least one or two Dream Theater songs. Probably Wait for Sleep, because that's the one that got me into it. So I was like, if it's going to get me into it, it's got to get somebody else into it. So I'm going to go with that. Has to be on there. I want to say Black Diamond. There's got to be a couple of Halloween songs. I imagine Dr. Steen is on there because that's just like a very catchy tune at the time for me. I can't imagine I put Halloween on there. Halloween by Halloween, because that's just too long. So I imagine I would have put Dr. Steen. Maybe Eagle Fly Free. Maybe. I want to say at that time I had Eternity X, and I probably put Eternity X in there, and it would have been Baptized by Fire, if I had a guess. I don't know. Do you know how many songs I put on there? Do you have that?
Yes, I could tell you exact. So there's what I would consider an intro track, and then besides that, there are 18 songs.
So funny that I put an intro track. Like, what was I doing back then? So funny, right?
You had a lot more free time back then, to be honest with you.
How many did you say? I'm sorry, you lost me with intro track.
Yeah, well, it happens. One intro track and then 18 individual songs.
This is on a tape?
Yeah, well, tapes held, what was the maximum you could fit on a tape? Because tapes fit more than blank CDs.
You could put it on both sides, right? You recorded on both sides.
Yeah,
right?
I think you probably could do... there were tapes that were an hour on each side. This comes out to about an hour and an hour and hour and a half. So it probably was
90-minute tape, right?
Yeah, it was probably like 45 minutes on each side.
Knowing me, because I'm a type A, I probably put like one, like Dream Theater, let's say, on the first side, and then one on the other side. So you got like two different songs from each band. So that way you'd have an opportunity. I don't know if you still have the original order or even remember what was on one side or the other, if you just have the bands now in alphabetical order or something.
No, I have the exact order.
You do? Do you actually have the tape still?
I don't have the tape. But I do have right here.
That's like the Holy Grail, right? Like you don't have that.
I'm not going to show you the list, but this is the
insert,
the cassette insert, as you can see here.
Oh wow, Manowar! Look at that. Obviously, that's on there. Then.
And I'll show you the list. I'll show you the other side when we're done. But I did. I saved all of the. There's I don't even have the ability to play a audio cassette. So most of my audio cassettes I threw out, but I saved all those liners because I just thought that's just something that should be kept, and it's like a relic, like a legendary relic. So why don't we dive in? So do you have the slightest idea what your intro track was?
I'm gonna guess that it's something off the Halloween album that I forgot about. That's probably some Halloween.
So this was something that I didn't have until very recently. You had ripped this bootleg for me because I couldn't find this intro anywhere. This is from the Rush Majestic Symphonies bootleg.
I was going to say that Pat did get me that album too, and I don't think he got me that first. I think I recall that my first concert was Rush. Okay. So it was probably at MSG, and I remember that was very crazy. And also was Typo Negative shortly thereafter, because that was right around that was in the middle of high school, because I recall Pat's friend was an artist or into it, and he could do face painting very well. So he painted my whole face white and put a big black cross down my face later that evening.
I would love to see a photo of that.
I wish I had it. I took the face paint off, but what I was left with was a red cross across my face, and I had to go to Chaminade, where the Catholic priests were going to watch me in each class with this big red cross on my face.
Was it anywhere near Ash Wednesday by any chance?
No, it was not even close. I don't think it was like upside down or any of that stuff. It was just like The fact that it was on
that would have been your last day at Shaman.
Oh my god, dude! It was something else. So yeah, so I would imagine that there's some typo negative in there. I would maybe, but yeah. So Rush, that's interesting. So
it's the 2001 Space Odyssey intro, which wrestling fans will know as the Ric Flair theme song, and I think that was probably your thought process was, let's do something a little wrestling related to kick off. So it's just like this minute intro. I guess Rush had been using that as their intro. I'm not sure when this bootleg was recorded, but I always remember that being on the tape, and I never had. That was the only track that I didn't have. And I remember I reached out to you a couple of years ago, and you dug up the CD and ripped it and sent me the bootleg, and so I was able to put the original intro back in. So now it's complete. So that goes into Metal Warriors by Manowar. That was my first metal song because of this tape. And it, to me, it's like, what a way to kick things off. It's kind of like this metal anthem. Do you remember what your feelings were about Manowar at the time? I mean, you literally wrote other bands play Manowar Kills on the tape, the insert of the tape. So,
I mean, and that's true. They do. And the reality is that at that time, there was a little bit of a story. I think you'd have to ask Pat for the right story, but it has something to do. Pat was seeing a lot of Manowar at that time. And I think it had to do with someone he knew. I don't exactly know all the relation. May have been some previous girl he had dated or something to that effect. Their mother or something was the accountant for Manowar. So got him on like the tour bus at some point. It was kind of a crazy story. I mean, this guy always falls into some good luck. And long story short, that was a very real thing during that time. And Manowar was like, he probably was going to a few concerts, and that would have been something we talked about. And he would have showed me some videos with some nudity in it, or lewdness, whatever the right word is. And there was definitely, this really. I remember the video that he showed me, like talking to me about how they became a band. And it's not you don't just get music with Manowar, you get a story. So that and then when you listen to their music, it's very, I don't know, it stands out. It's very powerful and very something you need to listen to, and something that you would put on that thing. Why I put it first, I couldn't tell you that. It was probably just the fact that I named that, wrote it on the insert. I was like, what am I going to write here? It's just probably a phrase that my cousin said every single time I talked to him.
I don't think that's changed. I was going to say it's,
So I mean, like, he's. I don't want to mischaracterize him, but yeah, it's what
I think that's his outgoing phone message. If you get his voicemail,
it very well might be. So I mean, at the end of the day, you got to play some Manowar on there. So yeah, that's probably there. And I can't remember all the names of their tracks. I'd like to get back into all their old stuff because it's just so good. But that would be one of them. And then just keep thinking about Joey DeMaio's bass, where he plays that one song with the bass. It's like something about Cherokee warriors and all that.
Yeah, Spirit Horse of the Cherokee.
Spirit Horse of the Cherokee. That song still sticks with me, so perhaps that made the shape too later on.
I always looked at it as like, all right, you want to get into metal? Well, this is how you start, and like I thought that was like the thought was like, all right, if you can't, I mean, literally in the lyrics, if you don't have the balls to take it, then you can leave the hall. Like, it's like
some indoctrination.
Yeah, if you can't handle this song, press stop and go back to listening to Green Day. Like that was the message I was receiving. So to confirm one of your predictions, the next song is Black Diamond by Stratovarius. This song I just remember was the one that when I played it for Justin, Nick, Ryan especially, blew everybody out of the water. Like they heard this song and it was just like, I think it changed everybody's life. Like Kreia, Brian, like everybody loved this song.
But that's because you got to understand, at the time I was listening to Metallica and Tool and stuff like that. So this was like the next logical extension because I had never heard keyboards in it. So like once I heard those, Jen Johansson keyboards at the beginning of this song, my mind was blown. I'm like, what the fuck what is this? Right. And then that was the gateway drug for me. So like, I'm happy that you actually put it on the tape up front and it wasn't like buried in the back, you could have easily led with this thing, and I think it would have been like a complete hit from Jump Street.
And I think of Ryan too, when we were at Ryan's house one time, and he just puts on a pair of headphones and goes to his keyboard and just plays this song over and over again and learns the whole intro in like 15, 20 minutes. I was just like, all right, well, this clearly made an impression on Ryan. But yeah, this was, I just remember, like, Manowar is just kind of like this raw, heavy metal, balls out, whatever. This is like the first taste of like this power / speed metal, like neoclassical in ways. Like, I don't know, this, I just remember.
And the first foreign band, right? I mean, Rush obviously being Canadian with the intro, but this is the first time you're hearing a band from Finland ever do anything.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, this was a real big hit. I just remember loving this and knowing that I needed to get this album as soon as possible, which was tough because I don't think there was. I don't think it was released in the States initially. You were talking about that kiosk at the wall, and like you were only able to order domestic albums from that. It wasn't like Slipdisc where you could get imports and stuff. Like the wall would only get you stuff that was released in the US. So like Dream Theater, Halloween, Iron Maiden, like those kind of bands were, doable. But like if you were looking for Angra, Stradivarius, or, later on Gamma Ray or Ed Guy, like that wasn't an option. So this was kind of like a holy grail in a lot of ways, trying to get our hands on some Stradivarius discs. So did you feel the same way the first time you heard Stradivarius? Like, holy shit, like I've never heard anything like this before?
I mean, yeah, Stradivarius was for me, like, at the time I was very interested in like guitar playing. And like I remember right around like high school, because of this music, I wanted to play guitar. And so I was taking lessons at the Guitar Museum up the block from us. And, that guy, Timo Tolkki or whatever, was just like, just hearing him play guitar for me was fantastic. Now, Justin brings up the piano and the keyboards and whatnot. And I think they were very like Baroque-ish. It was very like unique sounding keyboards. So at the time, what really caught me was just the intensity and speed at which he was playing. And I really liked Timo Koltapelti, whatever's voice. The two things together were just really different. And Black Diamond to me is just like a quintessential song off that album. So, if you're going to hear, if I was going to give you an opportunity to listen to Stradivarius, I don't think there'd be another real tune to listen to off that album that anybody else would pick. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that was the best option.
You were definitely into guitars at the time, because the next track is an Yngwie track.
Right, and that just speaks to the whole like speed guitar that I was getting into at that time. Like, you've got Halloween, you've got Timo Tolkki, and now you've got Yngwie Malmsteen. And again, like everything that I had at that moment, like my cousin was always very good at selling stuff. He's like, oh, dude, you got to get this Yngwie album. He's sick. And he would play it, and I'd be like, dude, this is like classical. He's like, yeah, but that's guitar. I'm like, oh, really? And then I was like, listen to it again. You're like, wow, this is a guitar. And then you're like, what's this guy's name? Like, what is it? And he's like, Yngwie. I'm like, Yngwie what? And he's like, yeah, there's a shirt. Yeah, exactly. And there's the shirt that everybody knows about. So
the Yngwie song was Brothers. I don't know if you remember that one. That's from, I think, from Odyssey, the Odyssey album, which is like a real
Seventh Sign.
Oh, Seventh Sign. That's right. Seventh Sign.
It was like a very like emotional kind of like almost mid-tempo, like no vocals, just a instrumental. Like, I thought this was a really cool song to kind of follow Black Diamond's really high energy, and this one just kind of like more of a chill vibe, but yet still a real guitar opus, I guess would be the word. Does it ring a bell at all, or?
I mean, essentially, like, I don't remember why I put it in that order, if that's what you're asking me off the top of the bat. But at the end of the day, like, it was probably a relationship of just a guitar and the speed. And I don't remember the track very well, but I do recall one thing that I did find a lot of very cool with Yngwie was like where you have like two guitars playing together an octave apart. And that was something I learned about later on, but like the sound of that was very cool. And I wonder if that sound was on that track. I'm curious now to know, because like that would be something I really liked and perhaps wanted to present that too on that album.
Well, maybe we'll have to make a Spotify playlist of all these songs, and you can go back and listen to the tape as it was.
Seriously, you need to do that. Yeah, seriously.
Okay. Provided all of these songs are on Spotify, which there's a possibility that some of them might not be. The next one, which I thought was another really good choice, was Alaska by Shadow Gallery, which is kind of like a ballad. Do you remember that, getting into Shadow Gallery? This was before Tyranny, so it would have just been like that first debut album, and Carved in Stone would have been the only two albums out at that point in time.
Yeah, so it's very easy to explain why I picked Alaska. First of all, it's slow, and I really liked the ballads. It's just not just from Shadow Gallery. In general, every album had to have a ballad at that time, and for me, like that was the best song on every track. Like I like listen to everything, but like the ballads and the expression and the emotion that the various singers put into those songs. But for Shadow Gallery, actually, it's a more simplistic reason. It's really the only song that is a song on their album. The rest of it is more conceptual and flows from one to another. And like, it's hard to just grab one of those tracks and just put it on there, because it just starts with music. Like, it doesn't just fade in. Like in Alaska, it fades in and fades out. So you could actually, if you're thinking about making a tape from its rudimentary sense, like you need to have something come in and go out, so you know when to hit record and when to stop recording. So yeah, I mean, and so that's why I put it. I mean, I'm glad you liked Alaska, because I can imagine many people being like, "This doesn't fit here." But
I always say, like, I was the same way. Like, I always gravitated towards the ballads and the more emotional type songs, like, Forever and One from Time of the Oath, or Wait for Sleep, like you said earlier. So I felt the same way. I will say this did not prepare me for what Shadow Gallery was like on most of their songs, and that was just a pleasant surprise. I do remember I did buy the CD at the Wall, though, in Lake Success. I do remember that.
Yeah, and I think what was cool about that album, or perhaps even that song, is there's some flute playing and such. And that really like highlights that, because I'm sure if I played it with you and you were next to me, like, oh, you got to listen to the flute. He plays the flute. And I would have been a big deal about that, because that's cool. For me at that time, like just the idea that these guys were playing these other instruments that just weren't guitar, drums, and bass guitar or whatever. So like that was a highlight. So, because at that time, another thing we used to do a lot of was read the inserts, like, the various little liners that came with the album. So I would have feathered through that thing like 100 times, known everybody's little picture in the back, and under each picture of their face, it would say like vocals and flute. I was like, what? A vocal and pan flute? Like, what the?
It was a lot easier when there felt like there were 12 albums that came out each year, as opposed to 12 each week nowadays, where you can't even keep up. But the interesting thing, though, is the next track is probably the most obscure track on the entire disc, I think is fair to say. And I'm not, for at least the most obscure band, no question about it. I've Opened My Eyes by Mind Odyssey, which is a great song, but nobody knows Mind Odyssey. And here they are on this tape, which I just thought was hysterical.
And like, what is it about Mind Odyssey that you liked the most?
I thought the vocalist was phenomenal.
Yeah, the vocalist. Like, at the end of the day, that's exactly why I put it there. I mean, that guy's vocals are insane. Yeah. I don't know who it is. And every once in a while, I just want to find that out. I want to find that music and listen to it, because it's exactly that's why I put it on there. Because I thought his voice. What was that? What was the song?
I've Opened My Eyes.
Oh my God. I mean, how great is that?
Yeah. Like, from an album, Keep It All Turning, which, quite frankly, not the greatest album, but this song is absolutely ridiculous.
It's driving. Like, that's like one thing that I find also nowadays I like about music, and clearly I didn't think it through back then, but it's just like when people are playing music that's just pushing you along, like, just, you don't have to do anything. You can just listen. But in that background, like, it just pushes you around. And like, it's kind of like when you're at the concert, like, you just want to sit there and listen, but you can't. You got to do this. And like, that's exactly what that song does. And that's why it's awesome, because, it's not Manowar. Like, Manowar, you got to put your hands up and you have to put the anthem. This is like just, your pure emotions, go buy into this guy's voice because he's just phenomenal. So
this is like the one band I think that is on this tape that like people might not have heard of. Like they like made 4 albums from 93 to 99. They disappeared for like 10 years, made another album, and haven't done anything since then. I feel like had they maybe kept making albums into the 2000s, we probably would have saw them at Prague Power at some point. There's a pretty good chance of that. But I think just that the fact that they kind of just disappeared for the first 10 years of the 2000s, I think people probably just missed out on them. But this song came out in 1993. I mean, that is wild to me that like that something, this just feels like really ahead of its time.
And I'll chime in that like I would love to know where I got the album from. So
well,
this would have had
where do you find this thing?
This could have been like one of those albums that Pat just grabbed in a store and like he's like, here I got you this thing, and like probably because he didn't want to use his own money on it. So like you said, like you want to get a hit or a miss or whatever. So it may have been one of those moves, and then I get this album thrown in my lap, and unlike him, I actually listen to the albums I buy. I don't let them sit on the shelf and just.
Well, that hasn't changed either. So I guess you got that going for you.
Yeah, I googled Mind Odyssey just to get a remembering of what the album. I immediately see the album that it was like this guy reaching out for like some ring or something like that. It's such a good album.
Go ahead.
I was just say I'm looking at it too, and another thing strikes me because I have all these albums in my basement. When I moved, I just put them in my basement on a shelf, like you just said. But I'm looking at this one, and it has that classic album, and then on the I don't know what the right word is for the anatomy of a CD, but it's got a ribbing on the edge that has like a cover that's all in Japanese or Chinese or something that I can't read.
Yeah, they call it the OBI strip.
The OBI strip, is that it?
That little piece of paper that would come in the Japanese albums.
Yes, and they always had a bonus track. So that's like why you wanted to get those albums over the American albums. So you could get Dream Theater here, or you get the Dream Theater over there, and it always had like some extra track you weren't going to get. If you can grab that, you're all the better. So, and I'm looking at this one, and that's the picture they're showing, and I'm like, that must have been what it was. He probably bought it at one of these shops that he was going to that I don't even know where, and that's where we got it.
Well,
nice.
We go back. We end the side A with three bands, all of which are not going to be a surprise, but I guarantee you that the last track, even though it's a band we've already discussed, is a complete like out of left field. So I'm just going to kind of run through these because like just to kind of close this up. Fate's Warning Monument, an absolute classic.
Yeah, it's great. And I can tell you why I picked it.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I mean, just because of that, he uses that roundback on it, that Ovation roundback.
Yes.
Which, again, like, at the time I didn't know what it was, but I could tell you, like, the sound of that guitar when it just pops in the middle is phenomenal. And, like, when you go to their show and for the first time and you're, like, sitting there in New Jersey in some hole-in-the-wall Club Benet, and you're watching them for the first time, like, oh, that's Monument. You hear it. You're like, what is it? Like, how does he make that sound? And then all of a sudden, like, they put that guitar in the stage, and he's got the electric around his neck, and he walks up to it, and I'm like, this is just cool. I mean, like, that's why that song is on that album. Go ahead.
Carolina the Fourth by Angra, which we already talked about, just an absolute like opus by arguably Angra's best song. I think that it's if not, it's in the top 3. I think most people would agree. And then
that song got picked, by the way, just since we're there. Because I remember when Pat was introducing me to Angra, his highlight was like they use these South American instruments that you can only find like in Brazil or whatever. I don't know if any of this is true, but like, and when you listen to Carolina the Fourth, inevitably you hear those different sort of drums and rhythms that they use to kind of create those sound scapes. And ultimately, it's like nothing you'll ever hear again, and it really captures his nationality, Andre Matos' sort of homeland in essence, and that's what's cool. Like, you didn't really get that other bands. Like this was something that when you put it on, it's very unique, it's very different, and it's very seemingly cultural.
And you knew it the second you know Angra as soon as you hear it because of those influences, which other bands were not doing at this time.
Right, and Carolina the Fourth was just like the track at the time that we used to just walk around going, Carolina the Fourth, took the river to the sky. It was like something that he and I were just jokingly saying back to forth. So if you're going to pick out one song off the album, not even looking at the album, because of the conversations that we would have on the phone or when we saw each other at my grandmother's house, that's what we said. So like inevitably,
and I always thought like you obviously must have thought a lot of this song to put a 10.5-minute song on a mixtape, because that could have been 2 songs. But like obviously the song was good enough that it needed to be on here. So I always thought that was an interesting thing too, because I think at the time, if I was going to put one song from Holy Land on a mixtape, I probably would have chosen the exact same one.
Touche.
You end this thing with a Halloween track. It wasn't Dr. Steen. It wasn't something from the best, the rest, and the rare. You ended this thing with a B-side. I'm laughing because it's just so absurd. You ended this thing with a B-side from Time of the Oath. It was on the Forever and One single called Light in the Sky. What the hell were you thinking putting the light? And I'm not saying it's a bad song. It's a great song, but like...
There's an easy answer, buddy. There's an easy answer.
The first Halloween song you put on this thing is a B-side from the Time of the Oath.
It's an easy answer, and it's not going to be an answer that's very impressive for you, unfortunately. But Nicchi, you've made how many of these, you said, over your years?
Countless.
All right, so can you guess why I chose that song?
Yeah, I have a pretty good idea. It's because you had a certain amount of time left.
Exactly.
And this song is 2.5 minutes long. So
exactly.
But
no
it actually
space on the mixtape.
It makes for a great last song on the first side of the tape, because I'm always a sucker for like something a little more mellow to kind of end things. So it's kind of cool that that's what you chose to end with. But yeah, I always assumed like, okay, I got like 3 minutes of space left on the rest of this tape. That's like precious real estate. Might as well find something that'll fit on there. And it was a good choice. I don't think
there were very many options that were that in, if you consider the music we listen to, unless it's an intro or an outro, there's not too many options for you. And so that probably just fit the bill. So
yeah,
to be fair,
it could have been Wait for Sleep. I mean, that probably would have fit in that slot too. So based on
perhaps
what I said earlier,
put on the next track and the next side, I don't know, because in my mind that's just like a big song for me. But maybe I don't know. Maybe I didn't want to make lose people on the slow songs. So, but anyways, that's probably, I don't remember the song from A Hole in a Wall, so it's probably not great.
No, it's actually a very good song. It's just
I may have to go back and listen to it now. That's why I kind of want to get into my own head.
Yeah, it's I think it's just a very Andy Darris, Pink Cream 69 kind of era, like just him and a guitar, like just a very soulful and emotional kind of tune. But it's a really good song. The next side starts off like with another epic, and it's Chance by Sabotage. And I don't remember if I told you I really wanted this to be on here, or I assume you would have put it on here anyway, because this, I think when we first heard this song, it was kind of like, holy shit, like this, it was just like unlike anything. I think it's almost a precursor to like what Trans-Siberian Orchestra would become. But what were your thoughts? I know Sabotage was kind of one of the bands that hit you harder than some of the others around that time.
Well, I think remember we were still hanging out together. It wasn't like you and I didn't know each other. So this stuff was very, for me, like very much a part of like what I was doing at that time. It was taking up a lot of my time. I remember playing NHL '94 and listening to Dream Theater on loop in the back of my head. So like even to this day, when I listen to some older Dream Theater stuff, inevitably I just have these flashbacks out of nowhere to playing Genesis and playing hockey and trying to get the Stanley Cup. Inevitably, like this stuff was playing nonstop. So if I was, Chance is a 6 song, so I recall you and all of us singing it together. So I don't know at what point in my life we were at. Were we listening to it already? I don't know. But it's definitely a song I loved. So it would have made it one way or the other. But whether or not, I don't know if you would have asked me. I don't think that would have been at that moment. But we may have been singing in the streets together on bikes as we were riding around town. And perhaps that's just why I chose it too.
That would make a lot of sense. This would end up being the first metal CD I would go out and buy. I mean, that's how much I liked Sabotage based on this song. So it made a big impression on me. I'll say that. So we go back. The next track, we actually are going back to Fate's Warnings, Outside Looking In. Do you have a guess of what song it might be? Or I just said it.
You just gave that away.
All
so
right.
I'm going to go with Outside Looking In.
We'll play that game a different time. Yeah, this was the second song from Inside Out, Outside Looking In. Yeah, what your thoughts on that track?
That song by itself stands out because you just get to hear the vocals so well, and that's why I would have chosen it. There are lots of tracks. You got to pick one, but that song at that time, to this day, I still love that song. So it's like it's probably like my favorite song from that album. So, Monument was the guitar, and that song is his vocals.
And then you go back to Stradivarius with another kind of classic song, definitely upbeat, and that's Distant Skies.
Yeah, Distant Skies, because that's just the sixth song. And again, like I said, going back to our original talk with the whole chants, it was probably something that we were talking about. I was showing you guys, so I just wanted to keep it, on that album, so you guys can hear it again.
Then you go kind of back to back with Halloween. You go with 1,000 Years Away from the Andy Derris solo album, which is still a phenomenal song, by the way. I haven't listened to that album in 20 years. I really should kind of play that. So you go Andy Derris, and then a track that you actually mentioned, you kind of thought it would be on here, Eagle Fly Free, which I'm happy it made it because that is definitely, it belongs on here.
Yeah, so I remember Andy Derris's solo album was something cool because it was one of the first of its kind for me that like a singer was releasing a solo album. And I was like, oh, what's this going to be like? Is it going to suck? And I remember, my cousin was like having negative opinion about it. But I loved it. I thought it was really cool. I thought he had this kind of upbeat. It sounded like Halloween, so it was like you were getting a bonus Halloween disc to some degree because, like inevitably the singer, unless he goes completely wayward, is going to sound like the band. So in that instance, like, I just wanted you guys to hear a track from that. And then, how can you not like Eagle Fly Free? I mean, it's classic, right?
And then you go to see Halloween now, and you get to see both of those singers, as it turns out. So, this, like you said, it's like a good taste of both eras of Halloween. Eagle Fly Free was a song that blew me out of the water. I think that was one of the first, definitely my first Halloween album. I remember buying it at Mr. Cheapo's I went to Mr. Cheapo's with George Mitchell and Mike Crea, and I remember I bought Keeper 2, George bought Rust in Peace, and Mike bought Kings of Metal by Manowar. If memory serves, I might have gotten Mike and George's discs mixed, but I think I bought like Keeper 2 for like $5 or $6, and I was just so excited to have the full album that this song was on. But this is still, to this day, one of my all-time favorite songs.
And Mr. Cheapo's is still open.
Yeah, that's wild. Slip Disc long gone. Mr. Cheapo's still there.
But I thought Slip Disc burnt down. I could be wrong.
They just, from what I understand, and one of the listeners can actually correct me if I'm wrong. Charles, if you're out there listening, I believe they just it was like a lease thing. I think they just the lease was up and that was the end of it.
I don't know.
Rent being what it was, I guess. The next track is a one-off because it was a band that we have not mentioned yet. But I think when I mention it, your eyes will perk open. White Lion, When the Children Cry.
It's great. It's a great song. It's one of these ballads, and it's awesome. And I guess you guys didn't like that one as much, perhaps. But at the end of the day, that was something Pat was listening to probably really at that moment. And fast forward, I don't know, however many years it is now, because I just saw Mike Tramp play live again, so we still like him. He left an impression on me. He's just great. I mean, White Lion, there was this one album of White Lion's best hits or something. I can't remember the name of their best hit album that I had at the time. But their best hits, I love their best hits. Every song I could listen, Radar Love was on there. It was just great. Everything was great. So I really got into that.
I will never forget the first time I saw a commercial for Monsters of Rock or Monster Ballads or one of those like compilation albums that they would sell the ads for on TV, and then this song would come on and be like, "Holy shit, that's the song from Ralph's tape!" Like, I was like, I didn't realize that White Lion actually was probably more popular than any of the other bands other than Rush on this tape.
Yeah, no, White Lion was something you may hear on the radio. So, but again, like I don't know if I got that disc from Pat or if I got it from my uncle at that time, but I just was into their stuff. And I remember at some point in my life, I lived literally in the apartment above my cousin. So, when he played music loud, it would come through the floor. So I would be able to hear some of this like classic 80s hair metal stuff just by living in my building where I lived at that time.
That's one way to get people into metal. Just stick your ear to the floor and here we go.
Or force them to listen to it. Interestingly, you go back to another Savatage song on side B. You go with Gutter Ballet. So we did a little bit of Zach earlier, and now John Oliva singing Gutter Ballet. But how could you not love that? I think to this day, it's probably one of their most well-known tracks.
I mean, and to that point, it was one of my favorite songs off their album. So, and that was probably the original album I had of theirs, and that was probably one of the songs that really, because for me, like certain songs will catch my ear, and that's all it takes, and then I'll listen to that song over and over and over and over and over again, and then perhaps I'll say, okay, what else is on this disc? And then I'll find another track, and that's kind of how it happens. So like Gutter Ballet, I probably listened to 1,000,000 times.
No doubt. Again, another more obscure track as we wind up side B, Timo Tolkki's Soldier's Prayer, which is a phenomenal song off of his solo album, but really kind of obscure. I mean, like everyone talks about Stratovarius, but nobody talks about his solo album. What is it? Classical Themes and Variations. And this was one of the best songs on that album.
Justin, do you remember how hard it was to find this CD? Like, I remember
impossible.
we would... Anywhere we would go, we would go right to T and be like, nope. I ended up getting it as a gift from my aunt and uncle had an import CD store that they went to in Pennsylvania, and they bought me the Japanese version of this. But this was a very difficult album to find, and I loved this song so much. I really wanted to get the album, so eventually found it. But it's actually only one of 2 songs on the album with vocals. Most of the entire album's all just guitar instrumentals. But this is like a real cool song. I remember Knops really liking this song too. But this is going to be one of those songs. I just popped onto Spotify to try to put together this playlist, and there's a number of songs that are not on there, and this happens to be one of them. But I think this is a really cool song, so I'm glad that you put that on here. Do you have any memories of that Timo Tolkki album or not?
No, but again, it just probably speaks to like guitar playing and just probably was one of those tracks that caught my attention because I was into the guitar. And more likely than not, my cousin got it for me because he knew I liked guitars and wanted me to test it out before he bought it.
Sounds about right. Passage to Bangkok by Rush. So this was kind of like the first full Rush but honestly, what a fantastic song on a fantastic album.
So today I was driving home with my kids in the car and I just put it on because I was just love it. And I was like, yeah, you always try to find that song that you can bridge your kids into, and they like to find, the refrain. And, On a Train to Bangkok along the Thailand Express or something.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And like it's just I know it's a reference to like all these various countries, and it's so like I don't know the right word, but you can hear him describing these countries using like just such great descriptors that really pull you in. So that's why that's on that track.
I remember thinking
also it's short; it's not 15 minutes long.
Yeah, I remember thinking that it stood out. I didn't realize at the time that it was like significantly older song than everything else that like everything up to this point has come out in the early to mid 90s, maybe the late 80s with Halloween and White Lion. This song came out in the 70s on the 2112 album. So this one kind of was a real throwback. But it's funny because I remember when Rush would come on the radio, my mom would always say, "This sounds kind of like the music you listen to, just a little more subdued, I guess." So anyway, you finished off again. I'm thinking this might have been a time thing because this is only a 2-minute song, but it's "Sorrow" by Yngwie, which was a really very like slow and emotional guitar, kind of a Spanish guitar solo, and that was kind of the way that you finished things off on this tape. Does this ring a bell at all?
It's just a mixture of, like you said, short time, and also I was into that sort of Spanish guitar kind of sound. Just found it very cool, and so I probably was like, it was an easy choice when you only have 2 to 3 minutes left.
Now,
What's
after
fascinating.
go ahead. I think we're probably
going
going to say the same thing.
Fascinating to me is that there actually is no Dream Theater on this.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Like when it's hysterical because in retrospect, I think that they're one of the bands we probably to this day love the most, especially that early, Images and Words, Awake era Dream Theater, and there's none of it to be found on this thing, which I thought was really interesting.
I wonder if it had to just do with like maybe like did I not have the disc yet? I don't know. I can't imagine if I had all those others that I wouldn't have had a Dream Theater disc.
You would probably be the only person on the planet that had a Mind Odyssey disc and not a Dream Theater.
Yeah, no, that's a true point. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you. Perhaps like you guys knew about that stuff already, and I wanted to show you different stuff. Like, well, we already know Dream Theater. Like, perhaps you already had one album or something, and you heard it enough at my place because I know, like I said, I was playing Dream Theater religiously every time I sat down and played Genesis or whatever. So it was like in my CD player. So like, unless you take the disc out and switch it, it's the same thing every time. It's not like today. So that's what I was listening to because I was too lazy to take the friggin' album out. So probably listened to Images and Words 1,000 times. So I don't know.
Maybe you were saving it for the second mixtape that we're still waiting for.
yeah, keep waiting. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
So how does all this, hearing all of this kind of come together? How does it kind of make you feel hearing about this like 20 plus years later?
I'm surprised I didn't put any what's that? Eternity X on there. I just that makes me upset that I didn't put that on there. I don't know.
To be fair, you might not have had heard it yet because it came out that year. So
yeah, I don't know. So like there's a lot of cool stuff on there. I'd like to go back and revisit, obviously, but and in retrospect, I think it did its job. I mean, I found when you have these kind of massive, bands with phenomenal now in hindsight discography, you can't go wrong. So I probably could have picked different songs off there and still won you guys over if that was my goal.
No doubt about it.
And to be fair, I don't know what drove me to make that album. I was probably listening to it, probably getting an earful from my cousin, like, what's with that guy Nicchi listening to Green Day? What's wrong with him? It's just the guy's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And like, there's only so much of that you can take before you go, you know what, let me take action. And that was making a mixtape. And I was like, here you go. Because I don't think back then we were making each other mixtapes. It wasn't like we were like,
no, definitely not.
Thing. So it may have just been like out of desperation to get everybody on the same page, in particular you. Like, I was more friendly with everybody else peripherally. So, you tell me it's kind of nice to hear you tell stories about how, you felt Justin and Ryan. I never knew Ryan sat down and played Black Diamond in a couple of minutes, learned it. Like, I know the guy's musically phenomenal, but I didn't know that was the case. So that's pretty cool. So, I mean, yeah, there's like a lot of interesting backstories. Like there could be many, additional tapes of this stuff just based on the crap you guys did with it. So, at the end of the day, I think it's really cool. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I'm glad ultimately that we all got together and found some common ground that we could sort of grow old with, even though we were kind of too young to realize that that's what we were really paving the way for. Yeah.
I mean, like I said earlier, I was just hungry. Like I always loved music and I was hungry for something different because the whole radio era of the early 90s that was so great for us with Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam and all those great rock bands, it kind of died in like 95, 96. I remember like Z100 would go from playing all that stuff to playing all hip hop and dance music, and it wasn't really our scene.
Overnight too. It felt like it was just like overnight. It was one day they were playing Pearl Jam, and the next day they were playing like, not
Pearl Jam.
Not Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
Definitely not Pearl Jam.
I remember like just the brief moments of hearing this different music with you. Like, I'm like, all right, maybe this is something I can grasp onto and find something else to listen to that I enjoy. And boy, if I had known like what a journey that just that tape would start me on, going to all these prog powers and doing this podcast, and it's meeting guys in bands through prog power. Like, it's just been such an amazing ride. I leave you with this. Here's your your liner notes. I don't know if you can see that. I will send a photo of that to you. But
what have I written there? I've got what is it? Hardcore birthday. Oh, so it was for your birthday.
Yep.
You could have said that, dude.
I did say that. That's how we started the episode. You really don't remember anything.
Well, I know you said that you thought perhaps I did it because you maybe asked for it or something like that.
I did. I said, for my birthday, I want you to make me a mixtape. That's how it was.
Yeah, but I don't listen. I don't.
Well, you did, and thank God you did. I mean, I'll send you a photo of that so you can see it. Clearly, even at age 16, with that handwriting, we knew he was going to be a doctor.
Well, that's the way it goes. Yeah, my kid's following in my footsteps. It's terrible.
Well, it was definitely a fun trip down memory lane. We thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you soon.
All right, guys. Anytime, since we are always just a text message away.
Cheers.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. This has been a blast, honestly. So take care, guys.
Definitely send me that set list so I can start listening to. Oh, you just did. There it is. Hilarious.
Like you said, just a text message away, right?
All right, there it is. All right, I'm going to go look at that now.
All right.